Hello and welcome. My name is Al Barrows, and this is UFO Disclosure, the podcast that's meant to show an average person's reaction to all the UAP, UFO news from everywhere and anywhere. So today I'd like to relate a story I found on alien cases. This occurred about the same time as the Roswell UFO crash, but in an entirely different part of the world. It involves an 8-year-old girl's extraterrestrial encounters in 1947 while living in rural Spain. It all started with a distortion in the landscape. On an afternoon that should have been like any other, suddenly the girl's gaze was drawn to the horizon. Lights, but they weren't stars, nor the glow of a distant city. They were bands of colored lights, vibrant, sketching out what looked like a rainbow. But there was something fundamentally wrong. There was no rain, no humidity, and those colors weren't coming from the direction of the sunset. The innocence of the children tried to make it seem as though it was a strange twilight, a natural wonder, but Uncle Juan, with decades of experience reading the sky and the weather, felt a chill. He knew where the sun set, and he knew those lights defied the natural order of things. He fell silent. Night fell, bringing a palpable unease. The rural silence, usually heavy and peaceful, was torn apart. Dogs, every dog in the vicinity, began to howl and bark with desperate intensity. The Munoz family dog, an animal known for its tranquility, transformed. He howled at nothing, trembled, scratched at the door. Uncle Juan, realizing the animal's terror, allowed him inside the house, something rare for the hygiene standards of the time. Inside, by candlelight, the tension grew. What were these animals sensing that the humans couldn't see? The answer came the next morning, and it was grotesque. During their morning walk, Juan and the girls encountered a neighbor, a shepherd. The man was in a state of shock, pale and stuttering. He reported that during the night of howling, his flock had been attacked, but not by wolves. Several sheep were dead. They had been mutilated. Specific organs, parts of the reproductive system, had been removed. The shepherd, a man accustomed to the carnage of natural predators, was terrified by one detail: the precision. There were no tears, no blood scattered like a wolf attack. These were surgical cuts, clean, made with a technology or instrument that this humble man had never seen. He spoke of going to the police, but what would they say? That a phantom surgeon operated on his sheep in the dark? While the adults tried to rationalize the horror, Prospera had her first direct contact. Back on the family property, Prospera's curiosity drew her to a nearby hill. There, floating with unnatural stability, were two spheres, red and yellow, pulsating, moving erratically like insects made of light. Any adult would have run, but Prospera was a fearless child. She approached. She reached out. The contact was immediate and violent. A sensation of intense burning shot through her hand. Crying, she ran to Anita, her older sister. Always protective, she tried to calm her, promising to treat the wound as soon as they got home. But the mystery deepened. Hours later, when they went to examine the hand, the burn had vanished. It was gone without a scar. The skin was intact. Uncle Juan, now adding up the lights, the howls, the mutilated sheep, and the attack on his niece, went into defense mode. He locked the doors. He checked the shotgun shells. The atmosphere at their house was one of siege. They were surrounded by something they didn't understand. The following afternoon, Juan's house was breached without a door being forced. Prospera and Anita were looking out the window when it appeared, a silver object, discoid, about 10 feet in diameter. It did not fly. It hovered a few inches off the ground, gliding smoothly towards the house. It had a glass dome on top, And most disturbing of all, it was absolutely silent. It defied gravity without emitting even a hum. Fear paralyzed Anita. She ran to close the shutters, trying to block the vision of the thing. But Prospera was hypnotized. She couldn't look away. The object parked right in front of the rustic house. A hatch opened. They came out, two beings, small, the stature of a child, about 4 feet tall. Their skin was pale, with a slightly bluish tint, almost sickly for human standards. Their eyes were large, elongated, black, and dominated their faces. They wore white jumpsuits, tight, impeccable, contrasting with the farm dust. They wore boots and gloves. They walked to the door. The dog, the one that had howled in terror the night before, was now motionless, in a trance, watching the visitors as if they were old acquaintances. The beings entered. There was no violence. There was a strange calm, a dreamlike atmosphere that seemed to dampen the panic. Anita, in an absurd reflex of manners instilled by her mother, offered a glass of water. The beings accepted. He held the glass, mimicked the gesture of drinking, but did not ingest the liquid. His eyes scanned the house, analyzing the simple furniture, the utensils, as if they were in an anthropology museum. Then they removed their gloves. They only had 4 fingers, thin, long, elegant, and strange. They pointed at Prospera. The communication didn't seem entirely verbal, but the words echoed in their minds. It is her, not the other. They spoke of a duplicate. They said there was a girl identical to Prospera in a place called Venus. Years later, Prospera would clarify. They used the word Venus, but made it clear they weren't referring to the neighboring planet. Venus was a name, a code, perhaps a reference to a base or a dimension. They made an offer to the 8-year-old girl. They asked if she wanted a gift. Prospera said yes. They said, "We will give you precognition, the ability to know the future." And they proved it right there. They began to narrate details of Prospera's life, things she had already lived, and events that would only happen years, decades later. The girl listened, confused, amazed, and terrified. Before they left a warning. They said, "We will return in 90 years, but you people don't live that long." The object outside glowed intensely and vanished. When Uncle Juan returned, he found the girls in shock. Fearful of being called crazy, they summarized the impossible event into a mundane lie. They said 2 strange men asked for water. Then that very night, the house had some very anomalous experiences. Cups broke on their own. The pantry door jammed as it welded shut. The dog went back to howling, and Uncle Juan slept with a shotgun on his lap, but Uncle Juan and Prospera's older sister, Anita, fell into a heavy sleep that night. Only Prospera remained awake. In the early hours, a silhouette appeared at the window. It was one of them. He was calling her, not with a voice, but with will. Prospera got up. She passed her uncle and sister, who lay there in a heavy sleep. She opened the door. There were 3 beings now, the 2 from before, and a third, one who seemed older, with wrinkled skin emanating an aura of authority, perhaps the leader. They guided her to a nearby slope, and there, parked, was a mothership, a much larger object. Around it, activity was feverish and silent. Tall figures resembling robots or humanoid machines were working. Prospera saw these machines rip an entire olive tree from the ground, roots and all, and carry it into the ship as if it were a twig. They were collecting samples from Earth. The family dog was there too, floating, asleep, being carried along. "Do not fear," the being said. "He is fine." Prospera was lifted by a beam of light. Gravity ceased to exist. She floated into the belly of that metallic object. Once inside the ship, there was none of the darkness from outside. There was a lot of light. It was illuminated corridors and screens, high definition images, technology unthinkable for 1947, when television was barely in its infancy. Prospera was lifted by a beam of light. She was taken to an exam room, and there she encountered something that would break the barriers between the species. A female figure. She had pale skin, like the others, the large black eyes, but her features were softer, more human. And when Prospera looked at her hands, she saw 5 fingers. The leader noticed the girl's gaze and explained. Her mother was from Earth, a hybrid, a bridge between 2 worlds, living there on that ship, observing the human child. Prospera was placed on a bed or exam table. The collection began. No pain, no gushing blood, but it was invasive. They took blood, skin samples, and hair. They used instruments to examine her digestive system and reproductive systems. On a screen beside her, Prospera saw the image of her own brain, and she saw when they inserted something. 2 small, tiny red objects were implanted in her head. What could that be, she thought? But she felt an artificial peace, a chemical or psychic comfort that prevented her from panicking. During the exam, a moment of bizarre levity occurred. Prospera noticed that the being's fingertips glowed red. Curious as any child, she commented out loud. The beings laughed, a strange sound, but recognizable as laughter, and showed her their hands, like adults entertaining a toddler. Before returning her back home, they gave her a final warning. You have a copy. You will not remember any of this until it is time. Then, all of a sudden, Prospera woke up the next day near noon. Her dress was torn, her feet dirty with red earth. Uncle Juan was confused. He was suffering from a headache due to excessive sleep. Anita remembered nothing, and Prospera's memory was locked away, sealed in some deep place in her mind. So Prospera grew up and became an adult, never remembering what happened to her, and working a mundane life as a barista in rural Spain. The mental block lasted for 34 years. Then the dam broke in 1981. Prospera, now 42 years old, picked up a book. It was a work by Antonio Rivera, the father of Spanish ufology. As she read about other cases, it was as if a key turned in her mind. The ship, the beings, the uprooted olive tree, the hybrid, the implants, it all came back in a violent torrent of images. She wasn't crazy. Her husband immediately believed her. Together, they sought out Antonio Rivera. The ufologist had been accustomed to frauds, but was stunned by the consistency, the wealth of detail, and Prospera's honest simplicity. She underwent hypnotic regressions, and under hypnosis, she didn't change a thing. She didn't embellish the story at all. The conscious story and the subconscious story were identical. Finally, Anita, the older sister, who for years had remained silent, broke her silence. Anita confirmed that yes, they came to our house. And yes, we gave them water. I like this story not only because it occurred about the very same time as the Roswell UFO crash, the summer of 1947, but also because even though hypnotic regression was involved, Prospera's memories never deviated from before the hypnosis. In other words, her memories were never tampered with. There was also the confirmation by her older sister, Anita, who also remembers the extraterrestrials entering their home and them offering them water. Another thing that's noteworthy to me is the mutilation of the sheep. It was surgical in its nature, something that wouldn't come to the fore in UFO accounts until Linda Moulton Howe exposed this anomaly decades later. The technology that Prospero also mentions that she saw on the ship, the flat screen TVs, is a technology that she would not have been aware of at the time in 1947. Mind you, she was living in rural Spain in a house that didn't even have electricity. As far as Prospera, she never really made any money from this story. She just continued to live a humble life as a barista in rural Spain. My name is Al Barrows. This has been UFO Disclosure. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks.